Now that you've learned about energy balance, it's important to learn more about what influences our energy intake, our eating behavior regulation. Why do we eat? Why do you eat? Is it your hunger or your appetite? Your hunger is your physiological drive to find and eat food, the body's signal in you to eat, whereas appetite is the psychological drive to find and eat food. And these are our two factors that work together in terms of telling our body when to eat food. So hunger is really made up from your organs, your hormones, and your nervous system. As you can see from this diagram, your nervous system and your peripheral body systems have signals that tell you to eat food. They provide you signals of hunger. Even metabolic influences, such as your blood nutrient levels. If your blood glucose level drops down low, your pancreas knows to make glucagon. And glucagon signals that you're out of nutrients and you need to make more. Therefore, that will stimulate the ability for your body to want to eat. It tells your stomach to growl. And these things work together to stimulate hunger. We'll talk even about a few hormones in a few slides that also help us with regulating hunger. However, our appetite also plays a role. It's our psychological drive that can sometimes override our physical desire to eat. Social customs, environment, mood, and senses also help influence what we eat. Diseases are here as well as medications, and even though I didn't really mention them much before, they do have an effect on your appetite. Also, your learned preferences for what you like to taste and what you don't like to taste, and your environmental factors in terms of your food availability or even the temperature outside, your mood, like your stress or your happiness. All of those can affect your appetite. So these two, hunger and appetite, really influence our food intake. And when we know how to stop, or how we know how to stop, is really through our satiety cues. And satiety is a state in which there is no longer a desire to eat. The two drives are fulfilled from above. And satiety is somewhat regulated by our hypothalamus. Our hypothalamus processes signals for food intake and also for satiety. It communicates with the endocrine and the nervous system to tell our organs to secrete hormones or not secrete hormones, or our nervous system to give messages to our brain to signal eating or not signal eating. So in this diagram here, the process of satiety, you'll see the brain is sensing the flavor of the food, knowing the meal was eaten, and it influences the stomach and intestinal expansion and activity, right? After our stomach extends, or what's called distends, getting bigger, expands, those little nerve endings send a message to the brain, hey, food has been eaten and we don't need to eat as much, so let's send out some signals to start satiety. Again, influence of nutrient use in the liver and related communication with the hypothalamus and other regions of the brain to secrete hormones, telling us that we've got enough blood sugar or we don't have enough blood sugar. And conscious thinking, of course, takes place in the brain's cortex, and that can overcome hunger and satiety. But just knowing these things together help us understand more about this complex process of when we're eating and when we're full. So in terms of eating behavior regulation, there's many systems at play. The sympathetic nervous system activity, which again is the nervous system related to the things that we don't have to think about necessarily, our blood glucose levels and our hormone secretions. There's a couple of hormones I want to mention, one being ghrelin, which is a hormone made by the stomach that increases food intake. It stimulates us to eat. So when we haven't been eating, we then secrete ghrelin to stimulate food intake. And we also make another hormone called leptin, and it's a protein made by adipose tissue that influences long-term regulation of fat mass. When our body eats food and we store extra as fat, our body secretes leptin, which of course signals the body that we're full, or satiety. It is true that leptin and ghrelin don't always work as we think they should, and there's more research being done into the levels of leptin and ghrelin and how they affect food intake, as well as other factors such as our endorphins like cortisol and serotonin, which are secreted when we consume food. Now, some people will say this is related to addiction, but if we don't have enough carbohydrates, we're grumpy because we don't have enough energy. If we eat carbohydrates, our body secretes serotonin to make us feel satisfied and calm us down, knowing that we have enough food for our body. So these endorphins generally try to work for us, not against us, but the processes of these regulations, as I've just mentioned, are a little complex. So what affects our weight then? Is it our nature, our genetics, versus our nurture, our environmental factors that drive us to find and eat food? I would say it's a combination of both. So in terms of nature or genetics, what influences our weight really is our body type is based on our genetics. We can't determine whether our height is going to be short or tall. It is true that your height potential is something that's genetic, and if you don't eat enough food, it's possible you might not grow as tall, but if you eat a lot of food, you might not necessarily grow taller. So there is some, genetic variation in height, but it's important to realize that height is mostly genetically determined, as well as the location of your fat storage. Some of us have bigger waists, some of us have bigger bottoms, some of us have bigger arms, let's say. And all of those fat storage locations are really based on our genetics. They're not based on the foods that we eat necessarily, right? That just determines how much fat we're storing. But the location of the fat deposits are mostly genetic related. And our basal metabolic rate, or our energy usage in the body, is partially related to those hormones that I've mentioned earlier. And those hormones and how they're released is often related to one's genetics. So what do we have a control over besides genetics? Well, we'll talk about environment in a minute. First, let's quickly mention the set point theory. As you can see here, I've got a picture of a thermostat. Our body, I always like to think of in terms of the set point theory, has a thermostat. And it's a genetically determined body weight. So once you become an adult, you have a body weight, and let's say your thermostat is set between 65 and 68 pounds, right? If we were equating that to temperatures in a room. And our body weight resists change. So for those of you that have remained at the same weight for a long period of time, it's probably because your thermostat is working to try to keep you within this predetermined body weight. And leptin assists in this weight regulation. There's many research studies that show this, along with a reduction in energy intake resulting in a lower metabolic rate. So anytime you try to push the limits and eat a lot more or eat a lot less, you may gain weight for a period of time and then go back, or you may lose weight and go back, right? If you've ever been sick before, you might notice all of a sudden the weight returns after you've lost weight. And that's because you may have this thermostat. Yo-yo dieting, or as we'll talk about later, weight cycling, where you're going up and down, may break this thermostat. And then unfortunately, the body doesn't know how to regulate its hormones or its body weight. So we'll talk about, we talked a little bit about hormone regulation before, but this set point theory suggests that you could kind of break your internal cues of hunger and satiety if you aren't eating at a normal pace all of the time. We do, of course, then have the ability to shift the set point weight as determined by the environment. So what is causing all of this weight gain? Has our genetics changed over the years? I think not. But microwaves have been introduced, all-you-can-eat pizza places, the big gulp is getting bigger and bigger, and fast food is abundant. So what is the role of our nurture, or the role of our environment? A lot of it has to do with our eating habits, and this can be from our family or our social habits. We also get our physical activity. partially based on our lifestyle and our families. Our environment plays a huge role in how much we eat. We see food, we want to eat it. We are influenced by the time of the day or the amount of food consumed or even the region of the world in which you live in, right? Can tell you whether you eat a lot or not eat a lot. So it's important to realize that your weight is made up of both your nurture and your nature. And we'll talk more about these in some of the discussions.